everybody, and welcome back to the Popular Music Books in Process series, a joint project of IASPM US, the Journal of Popular Music Studies, and the Pop Conference. I'm Alex Vizi, one of the series organizers, along with Kimberly Mack, Elena Razlikova, Francesca Royster, Gus Statler, Eric Weisbard, and Carl Wilson. You can find our whole calendar on the IASPM website under the Journal tab. You can also catch up on videos of all of our past sessions on Eric's YouTube channel, including our last session on jazz and its discontents with Andrew Barish and John Gennari. We're off next week, but then return on Wednesday, April 15th at 5:30 p.m. Dana Pollan and Charles Granada will be talking about their forthcoming book, Hoboken to Hollywood, The American Places of Frank Sinatra. But today, we're going clubbing. Maren Hancock and Charity Marsh will discuss their forthcoming book, We Can Dance If We Want to, Canadian DJ Culture Turns Up, and they're joined by Al Shipley, who will discuss his new book, Tough Breaks, The Story of Baltimore Club Music. A little bit more on our presenters. Dr. Maren Hancock is an assistant professor of arts and cultural management at MacEwan University. Her research contributes to popular music studies, arts and cultural management, and community-engaged arts research, with a focus on gender-marginalized participation in DJ and electronic music cultures. She is the first scholar to conduct extensive research on gender and DJ culture in Canada. She is currently co-editing the first academic collection on Canadian DJ culture and completing a monograph, Stereotypes, Canadian Flinta DJs Sound Off. Her first book, Lady Lazarus, Confronting Lydia Lunch, was selected for the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame library. She is also a DJ, producer, and co-owner of Dialed In DJs, a Toronto-based mobile DJ company. Dr. Charity Marsh is a professor and head of the Department of Creative Technologies and Design and the director of the Humanities Research Institute at the University of Regina. Marsh's research focuses on hip-hop and DJ cultures in Canada, popular music and gender, and community arts programming. Marsh is co-editor and author of We Still Here, Hip-Hop North of the 49th Parallel, and director of the award-winning documentary I'm Gonna Play Loud, Girls Rock Regina and the Ripple Effect. Marsh is currently working on feminist activism, community building, and social justice, considering the interventions and impact of girls' rock camps in Canada, a comprehensive study of all 19 girls' rock organizations in Canada. She is also leading a team of researchers and artists in the development of Generate Collaboratory, a new interdisciplinary hub for sound research, creation, and training at the University of Regina. And last but by no means least, Al Shipley has written about music over the past 2 decades for publications including Rolling Stone, Spin, Pitchfork, GQ, Vulture, The Village Voice, Vice, and Complex. His career began at Baltimore City Paper, where he extensively covered Baltimore's hip-hop and dance scenes, as well as the city's homegrown genre of Baltimore club music, presenting his work on the subject at the Pop Conference and the Baltimore Book Festival, and continuing to write about Baltimore music for publications, including the Baltimore Banner and the Baltimore Sun. His first book, Tough Breaks, The Story of Baltimore Club Music, was published by Repeater Books in August 2025 and earned praise from Wire magazine. During their conversation, please post your questions as you think of them in the chat, and in the last part of the session, Kim will call on you to unmute and ask them during the Q&A. And of course, we also encourage you to use the chat for comments and conversation. However, we'll ask the presenters to ignore the chat during their discussion, and we'll send them a copy of the chat transcript later so that they won't miss anything. And now, I'm happy to turn things over to Maren, Charity, and Al.
Okay, so when I talked to Maren and Charity, I think you guys said I should read first and then you'll do your presentation, right? Okay.
Sounds good.
So yeah, I'll just read a bit from the book since, I know sometimes with these things the book is, as in their case, still being worked on, but since mine's done, I thought it'd be fun to kind of talk about one of my favorite parts of the process because again, as she said in my bio, I've been kind of covering this scene for many years, even before I decided to do the book. It kind of came in as an outgrowth of the Baltimore City Paper. We were like, maybe we should do like an oral history about this stuff. And at a certain point, I was like, this could be a book. So I was in touch with a lot of these guys, like some of the kind of the founding fathers of Baltimore club music, like Scotty B and DJ Booman. I talked to many times over the course of before I started this book and during it. And one of the interesting things that happens is, and I probably talked to, there's about 50 different people I interviewed either explicitly for this book or I used earlier interviews. So it's a very interview-based thing. But still in the last year that I finished the book, I was still just uncovering really great stuff. And it's kind of one of these things that's like you realize at a certain point, you could do this forever, but it's good to finish it up and publish it. But here's an example in chapter 6 of like something that came together really late in the book that was kind of interesting because again, Scotty B was kind of one of the main guys Unruly Records is kind of the Baltimore Club, what like Def Jam is to hip hop or something, where it's like they're the biggest, longest lasting label. They released a lot of classic records. So basically, in the early '90s, Scotty B worked with this guy DJ Equalizer, and he made his first record called "I Got the Rhythm." And I'm still really not sure. Again, the crazy thing with all this, is these guys will tell you different things. So it's like I don't know if this was I Got the Rhythm was more of a Scotty record or more of an Equalizer record. They both kind of take more credit than the other one wants them to. But so Scotty B made his first on record appearance with that, and his friend Sean Caesar made his first appearance with a record with a group called Runaway Slaves. It was kind of like a hip hop record called Booty Mission, Yo Yo Where the Hoes At. And this was released by Savage Records, which was distributed by BMG. It was like a really well-funded record label that didn't last very long. So like he was label mates with David Bowie for like a year, and then that label didn't last very long. Um, and he got to go promote the record in England, and they made a video, and there was like a remix by Salam Remy, who did a lot of like Fugees and Nas stuff. So at this time, Scotty was working at Intercity Records, and Sean Caesar was working at DJ's Outlet at Old Town Mall. And they said, we were battling to see who could sell more of the other's records. This was like a really kind of healthy competitiveness, where like Scotty had a better record store situation than I did. Sean said, so he sold more copies of my record than I sold of his, which I think is like a really beautiful example of what this scene kind of did. Like people would compete, who I can sell more of your record than you can sell of mine, which is a beautiful thing. So they both had gotten a taste of making a record, and they had their ideas. So they decided to team up. And at first they branded themselves as the Underground Track Team, and soon they decided to start a label together. And the first guy they started with was Charisma, Christopher Clayton, who's like really well known global dance guy. He was kind of there at the beginning of Baltimore Club, but he's kind of more known in the general house music scene now. But again, so I talked to, Scotty and Sean, the two main guys of this label, many, many times over years. And like the last time I did like a formal interview for the book with Scotty, in the last 6 months that I was like wrapping things up, I was just like trying to, fill in things. I was like, oh, who came up with the idea for the label? It's assuming it would be either Sean or Scotty. And he goes, no, there was this guy, Tyree, this friend of mine. We were just sitting on crates in my apartment, and he just stood up and said, because he always used the word unruly. That was like his favorite adjective. He just stood up and said, unruly motherfucking records. And everyone was like, that's it. That's what it should be. And the crazy thing about this is that I didn't even realize, because I had a bunch of other interviews, and it was kind of one of these things where like anyone in the scene who was interested in talking to me, I would talk to them because you never know what you find. Which again, I did like 50 interviews. Some of them were with major people in the scene, some of them were not. So there was this guy, DJ Ty B, who used to be DJ Tyree. I didn't realize until the day after I talked to Scotty, I started talking to Tyree, that he was the guy Scotty told me named the label. So it's just one of these kind of weird kismet things. He started to tell the story himself. I was like, oh, Scotty told me this exact story yesterday. Which if someone else, if I just run into this guy and said, oh, I named this label, I have to ask Scotty if that's true. But I already knew it was true because Scotty told me the story. So, and Tyree Brownlee started to like really become one of my favorite people in the book because he just had all these great observations about the book. So about the scene back then, because he was just kind of a fly on the wall for so much stuff. He didn't put out any records on Unruly, but he named the label and he was there for a lot of the big moments. And he told me all these great stories about just people fighting in the club and getting kicked out and thrown down the stairs of these clubs. Just really funny stuff. And so when the book came out, it was really fun to like get him, to come to some of the events and kind of get a little of the credit he never got back in the day. Uh, so yeah, they were on Labyrinth Road at Scotty's little apartment, and they named the label, and they were hanging out at Intercity Records where Scotty worked, and Tyree would help them kind of sell the mixtapes they made because back then, people would just kind of tape the DJ mixes they did, and they would sell the tapes. So Tyree Brownlee was DJing house music at Club Ozone with DJ Cornbread. He was warming up the crowd for Scotty. and they would make these party tapes. And between a stint in the U.S. Army and getting a day job to provide for his family, Tyree Brownlee never devoted himself full time to music like his friends did unruly, and he never released anything on the label. Like I said, I said when they started really pressing records, I was working. I was 9 to 5. I loved the music, but I was a taxpayer. I was locked in. I had to take care of my kids. Uh, so Unruly was primarily a vehicle for Scotty and Sean at first. They were like, we just want to put out our records. But really quickly, this became just because they were the guys in the scene that people knew had a label. They started putting out DJ Class, DJ Technics, DJ Boomman, KW Griff. They averaged about 8 to 10 releases a year, primarily 12-inch EPs, one or two or a handful of songs. Their brand became strong enough that they started to kind of, their logo. So I'm wearing the Unruly shirt right now, so they have the logo, and people would have, um, people could just go into the 5 or 10 stores downtown Baltimore that sold vinyl and kind of trust that whatever they bought from this label, they could play in the club on Friday. And so there was just a very, very strong relationship between the stores and the clubs and the DJs. And they began introducing sub labels like Hardhead Records, which was like the son of Unruly. And for a while, because they didn't know it was called club music yet or Baltimore club music, they'd call it different things like Hardhead music. So a lot of times, for a while, it was like they thought Hardhead was the club music label, and then Unruly was for house music like other cities made or hip hop. And they put out a rapper named Sparrow, who was one of the kind of the early stars of Baltimore hip hop. So I'm gonna jump down here. So yeah, so Scotty was saying we were thinking Unruly was going to be a house label and hip hop label, and VW V103, which was like the big radio station in Baltimore at the time, they would actually have 3 hours on Friday nights where they would actually kind of the Unruly guys would do um, kind of each genre. So Scotty B would play the club music for an hour, Charisma would play the house music, and Sean would play the hip hop. And Charisma made a few like great Baltimore club tracks like Mamako Sa and Kong. But again, he was just kind of he was along with Basement Boys, who were kind of a big house music brand out of Baltimore. So he kind of almost transcended that scene. Like I think a lot of people who know Baltimore club music and know Charisma don't actually know the contributions that Charisma made to Baltimore club music, which was a fun thing to dig into here. So basically, and Unruly kind of came along after Doo Doo Brown was the big record from Two White Brothers and a Dog. That was kind of like the first national hit from Baltimore club music. So after that, sometimes, like I said, they call it hardhead music. They also called it doo doo music. Like, kind of glad that one didn't. I'm glad that I didn't. I'm not writing a book about doo doo music. But KW Griffin, Jimmy Jones, and Boomman had their group Doo Doo Kids, and later they started like a label that was like Doo Doo Kids Records. And there was also Knucklehead Records from DJ Technics, which is also kind of like people call it hardhead, knucklehead music. Again, it was years before people really had an idea of what to call it. But there was this. I actually live in Laurel, Maryland, which is in Prince George's County, a little outside Baltimore, and there was a distributor called Liaison Records that was based here in Laurel. And they distributed a lot of these Baltimore labels. And DJ Equalizer got a call one day in the early '90s, and Tom, the guy from Liaison, said, he gave him a call. He said, Bob, look, I keep getting these calls from overseas. They want to know where they can hear more of that Baltimore club music. And that was the moment when the light bulb kind of went off. He was like, oh, I guess that's what it's called. People are calling it Baltimore club music. And I wanted to jump ahead a little bit and talk about DJ K Swift, who died in 2008. And she was kind of the biggest female DJ of the scene. And so basically, she got her first turntables when she was 15. She was like, she'd go to some of the established DJs in the city, like Rod Lee, and kind of be like, I'm going to work with you someday. And they were like, oh, okay, this teenage girl wants to be a DJ. And they had no idea that she was going to be more famous than all of them until she really started to, she worked with Rod Lee, and he had a label called Club Kings with DJ Techniques. And then when another producer signed K Swift and kind of wouldn't let her out of her contract and wouldn't let her use her name, Rodley said, okay, I'm the Club King, you just be the Club Queen. And that's how she kind of, even before she was really famous, she had the Club Queen brand. And that kind of helped her get get a foot in the door at the radio, and she was like answering phones before they put her on the air, but she really became like the most popular on air personality probably, through the like early 2000s through when she died in 2008. And it was one of these things that was really tragic is that when I remember we have this big summer festival every year, Artscape, and I went to see Kay Swift spin at Artscape in 2008, and she was talking about how she was about to do her first shows in Europe, and she was about to sign a label deal. I didn't even realize until years later, someone told me that, like, literally, like the weekend of that show, they were setting up this label deal with Koch Records, which is a big indie kind of national hip hop label. And the day after I saw her spin, she was having a pool party at her house, and there was an accident. And I just remember waking up for work on Monday morning and getting all these texts of like, oh, there was some kind of accident. She was pronounced dead at the hospital. And it was just one of these things where it's like there were some big records after that, and the scene has kind of recovered, but there's really, like, I feel like even in the book, there's a feeling of like before and after of like once she died, uh, you know, the scene had a lot had a real like aftershock of like, just part of it was just not knowing why she died or how, it being kind of mysterious. It just wasn't an accident. People have these resentments over the people that were there not saving her, whatever happened. So it's one of these things where it's like, it really stings. That's like we had this great female DJ that was ruling the scene for a few years, and then we lost that figure. And we've had some other female DJs that were inspired by her, and one that I worked with pretty closely on the book and stuff, Ducky Dynamo. But it's one of these things where it's like we lost a really amazing figure who was like talking about Baltimore Club on MTV News and was spinning for like the Rhapsody BET series. So it's one of these things where it's like, it's probably the biggest what if of the book. It's like what could have happened if this person had not just suddenly died at 30 years old or about to turn 30. Um, and I feel like I've talked enough. I don't know if we want to turn it over to the next bit of the thing.
Yeah, Alex. Thank you, Al. And thanks for, I mean, obviously that's a big interest of mine is the history of women or flinted DJs because it's not as well documented, right, as the
Yeah,
history of men. And the history of DJing is historically considered to be male dominated, but people are changing that. And it's like that's again, I appreciate hearing about K Swift. I knew about them. I didn't know as much as I know more now. So thank you.
right.
But I guess so, Alex, should I just I'm a nerd and I have a little slide presentation. So should I just share my screen and go for it?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay. I'm gonna hit a timer here because Sherry pointed out I am quite chatty.
I love it. I love it.
But you're not the only one that's pointed that out. So I'm gonna hit share, which is I always get messed up moving from Teams to Zoom. All right. So does everybody see this first slide, but not my speaker notes, hopefully? Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna assume
Good.
that that's the case. And I just want to say just a brief land acknowledgement because I'm speaking to you from Treaty 6 territory, specifically Amasquaski Viskahikan, which is the Cree word that loosely translates it's a word that loosely translates to the phrase Beaver Hills House and otherwise known as Edmonton, Alberta. And so I'm acknowledging that the land on which I am here in Treaty 6 territory is the traditional gathering place of many Indigenous peoples. And we honor and respect the history, languages, ceremonies, and culture of the First Nations, Métis, and Inuit who call this this territory home. So I'm going to give a brief, hopefully just 5 minutes overview of our book project, which is still in process, although we're really excited because it is wrapping up. So we're just currently reviewing and editing and formatting the chapters, and we're submitting the formatted manuscripts to Wilfred Laurier University Press this summer. So the first question, I think is probably an obvious one, is why an edited collection on Canadian DJ culture? So the answer is there's Canadian DJ culture is misrepresented. And I think this is well exemplified by a Google search. So the screenshot that you're looking at is actually from October 17th, 2025. But I just did the same search this morning for just Google for Canadian DJ culture, and the same Red Bull article is coming up as the top hit. And I find this really frustrating because you can see that this article is titled, "This is How DJ Culture Evolved in Canada." And then it cites 15 Canadian DJs. The vast majority are white, English-speaking, cisgendered men. There are no women or gender expansive DJs mentioned. So the lack of other public perspectives is problematic, as is Red Bull's hegemonic portrayal of DJ culture, because it is inaccurate. So the global majority, women, Indigenous, trans people, non-binary, and queer artists have been making foundational, vital contributions to Canadian DJ culture since its inception. And I knew this, just anecdotally from being a working DJ in Canada, starting in Vancouver in the late 90s until the present time, still a working DJ. So I was like, this isn't true. I know that it's, some of the people that they mention and stuff, it's just inaccurate. So that bothered me. And also interestingly, I found out in my research that technically the first DJ was a Canadian. The name was Reginald Fessenden, and he gave the first radio broadcast of music and speech in 1906. So I thought that was interesting. And so I'm like, Canada's unique contributions to DJ culture seem to be absent from academic and public discourse. So in an attempt to correct this narrative, I approached Wilfred Laurier University Press and Charity Marsh at the same time. I think it was around the same time in 2001. And so fortunately, Charity was interested in co-editing the volume with me, and Wilfred Laurier University Press was interested in publishing it. So I was like, okay, I'm going to do this. So the process has been it's taken 5 years. We recently brought on a third editor who's with us today, Ian McPherson, my colleague at MacEwan University, and an old school raver that I met raving over 20 years ago, almost 25 years ago. So Ian contributes a chapter about Vancouver's house music scene in the late 80s, and the early 90s, focused on the club Graceland and its sister publication Disco Text. So we asked Ian to join us as a co-editor to help review and edit the chapters, because we've been working on this for 5 years, and we want to honor contributors' contributions and get this thing to the press as soon as possible. So again, it's exciting that it's happening. So I'm going to just discuss the scope and give a brief overview of the table of contents. And then I'm going to hand it over to Charity, and she's going to briefly discuss one of the chapters that she's co-writing with Lindsay Knight, whose artist name is Equal. So I will proceed. So our contributors include scholars, journalists, practitioners, other stakeholders in in DJ culture, who explore Canadian DJ culture from historical and current perspectives, cross and interdisciplinary perspectives, and local and regional expressions. So this collection offers much needed contributions by amplifying diverse voices and stories, illustrating multiple generational and genre-based factions of DJ culture within a Canadian specific context. This is not an easy task, we've discovered, and I didn't think it was going to be either. So we've taken a hands-on approach as editors, and we're collaborating with all the contributors to produce work that speaks, across themes, and to produce an analysis that goes beyond a mere examination of historic and current key Canadian DJs, producers, instigators, and sites of DJ culture. So the works in this volume illuminate themes like the impacts of party promoters and collectives, music labels, festivals, venues, both legal and illegal, media artists, and dance music genres in regional, national, and digital scenes, as well as cultural and community groups, political and social movements, Canadian popular culture and media, and the global impact of Canadian DJ culture. So the introduction to the collection outlines these themes and establishes connections between and through them. And to further forefront themes, we are writing short introductions. We're just in the process of doing that, grouped according to theme for each section or chapter. And these short introductions are also going to function to fill in some of the blanks, because when you see the table of contents, especially if you're from Canada, you're going to realize there's a lot of blanks. There's a lot of really important scenes and locations that we don't have representation in the chapters. So we're going to try to fill in some of the blanks with the writing that we're doing as introductions to each of the sections. So this volume is both multi and interdisciplinary in its scope. Many of the chapters in this collection draw on intersectional, feminist, queer, and anti-colonial theoretical approaches and methodologies. So again, it's very much an antidote to this sort of hegemonic representation that's illustrated by that example of the Red Bull article. So again, we sought to prioritize voice often being ignored, and yet whose contributions to DJ cultures in Canada are significant. So again, we're working against a hegemonic lens in an attempt to build a collection that facilitates an understanding of Canadian DJ culture's decolonial and queer narratives, which are quite prominent. So given that the emergent field of DJ studies is cross and interdisciplinary and potentially arts-based and participatory, methodologies and or theoretical frameworks that are generative to scholarly studies of Canadian DJ culture include material and digital archives, oral histories, audio libraries, and more. And I know that I'm at 7 minutes, so I'll try to wrap this up in 3 minutes. So this is on the first section, and I'm just going to point out that some of the titles are still working titles. So this opening section focuses on the people behind the decks and on the dance floors. So here the contributors explore how DJs perform identity through their craft, navigating intersecting structures of gender, race, indigeneity, sexuality, ability, and genre. The chapters center lived experience, embodied knowledge, and creative expression, showing how Canadian DJ culture is shaped by and helps shape resistant colonial, patriarchal, and heteronormative frameworks. So the second section, which is rave geographies, queer zones, and sonic commons, scenes, spaces, and resistance. So here we're moving from identity to infrastructure. And this section investigates the clubs and after-hours venues, radio stations, and public policies that shaped Canada's underground dance cultures. These contributions examine the global circuits of Toronto's queer and diasporic rave scenes, as we touch briefly on the governmentality shaping rave regulations in as recently as 2025, and also to look at historical divides between Montreal's French and English-speaking communities via early sleaze club nights. And that's Erin's chapter, and she's here with us today, Erin McLeod. And then also just with reference to Ian's chapter, to leisure and labor in Vancouver's West Coast Underground. So these chapters position DJ culture as a practice of spatial disruption and communal memory making. And then the third and final section focuses on DJing as a method of cultural preservation and futurism. So these chapters trace the grooves of Canadian DJ culture as it's recorded, remembered, and reimagined. And so here these contributors illustrate how DJs and VJs, and I'm thinking about my chapter on Sam Taylor. If you're not from Canada, you won't know who she is, but if you're a certain age and from Canada, you probably know who Sam Taylor is. So how these DJs and VJs function as archivists, translators, and futurists, pulling from under-recognized histories to new sonic possibilities. So I'll just close. I want to give, before I pass things over to Charity, a brief shout out to Alexi, who's here with us, one of our contributors who wrote this chapter, Discovering Canada through crate digging, a newcomer's journey through a nation of obscure grooves. Alexi has a really great podcast or playlist series, I think it would be called, and you could correct me in the chat, Alexi, if I got that wrong, but I guess you'd call it a playlist series on Spotify called Canada Grooves. So I just wanted to point that out. Highly recommend. Yeah, so I think that's enough for me, and I will pass this on to Charity. We are at 10 minutes, Charity. Sorry, that was a lot longer than minutes.
No problem. If you want to stop sharing, perfect. Actually, you know what? I won't talk for too long, but I did think it was really important to talk a little bit about one of the chapters in particular. And actually, it speaks to some of the complexities of what Maren and I were going through when we first put out the call for chapters, but also in thinking about voices that continue to be marginalized and underrepresented in these conversations. And it was really exciting to be approached by Maren, to collaborate with her and co-edit on this particular piece. I did a lot of work on rave culture and DJ culture very early on, so in the 90s in that sense, and I really veered into hip hop for a long time. Based on community need and desire of where I was. And I'm coming to you actually from Treaty 4, so west no, east of where Maren is, but we're still west. So I wanted to just talk a little bit about the chapter that on DJ Cookham. And the diverse mix DJ is sort of where it is. And this chapter was developed from an interview conversation that I asked Equal to do. So Equal is a hip hop artist, a brilliant junior scholar as well, and doing a lot of really interesting and provocative work. And I asked if she would be willing to have this conversation with DJ Cookham to talk a little bit about history and this a recognition of for better like Cookham's participation and contribution and what she has seen in the DJ world in Canada. And so for those of you who don't know who Cookham is, Shayana Kutenhayu, she is a DJ and a multimedia maker from the Alexis Nakota Sioux Nation and Cold Lake First Nations. She lives in Vancouver and she tours nationally and internationally as the DJ for the Snotty Nose Res Kids. So some of you may be familiar with her work there. But she's a brilliant DJ, and this chapter takes up sort of this diverse mix and how she talks about the music making and her sort of storytelling. But one of the things that I also think was really important, and I wanted to just give read a little bit, is this role as not just a DJ, but as an Indigenous woman who is a DJ, and thinking about the kinds of intersections, but the kinds of responsibilities that she feels that come with that. And so I wanted to just speak from the chapter. So this is directly out of this chapter, and I'm really excited to work on this chapter actually with Equal, but also with Cookham because she's so giving. But here she says, so part of the chapter and in this section, it's focusing on this complex role. And she says, some of us have just been through so much. And for me to do that work, to be constantly, you got to represent, even if you're not at an Indigenous event, you represent. So for me to do that work, being on the front lines and, fighting for rights, I just don't have that in me. But I fought to be where I am. And a lot of us we went through so much because of residential schools and how we were raised. And I just don't want to fight that fight anymore. And then later on, she actually comes back to this and then talks about the important place and her role as a DJ, as doing this labor that she just said she was so tired of doing. So I thought it was such an important moment. She goes on to say, I do at certain events, if I'm DJing, I'll share other Indigenous artists in my set. And that's where I do like to use, I suppose, more political statements and share those through a DJ set. I definitely do that. It just depends on the time and the place. I'm not like at some corporate bougie event and playing like Fuck the Police or whatever, It just really depends. But yeah, I think it's a great way or a good way to express opinions, to express yourself, tell stories through music. This is definitely the way to go. And so the chapter really breaks down and thinks about all of the importance of the histories of DJ cultures. It talks about her role and the complexities of being a touring DJ and being a parent to a very young child. It talks a lot about the sort of historical uses of different forms and coming together of music in this sort of diverse mix that she brings forward. And the reason she talks about that is important, especially within Indigenous community events that she's often asked to play and participate in. And there's just, it's a lovely conversation that brings to life like the ongoing commitment and work and contributions of a lot of Indigenous artists, and in particular Indigenous women in DJ cultures here across all over this country. And so I wanted to bring that forward and just sort of start to talk about it. I mean, I love talking about Peaches, which is the other chapter I'm writing, and of course, Teaches of Peaches and the impact of that artist, but there's lots to be done, and there's so much in this collection, it's such an exciting collection in that it brings so many voices and so many stories to life that we don't that we haven't yet got to hear. And so it's a really exciting project to be part of. And I'm so thankful and grateful to have been asked, but also to get to read the work and a lot of these authors here with us today. And so just it's really an exciting project. And let's stop and have conversation.
Okay. Well, let me ask you guys, because you guys have all these different people contributing, and are all the contributors or most of them kind of in the academic sphere you come from, or are you getting people who aren't primarily writers or academics? Like, how did you find the people for the book?
I can start, Charity, if you want. So I mean, it's a daunting task, right? This is the first ever edited collection on DJ culture. And so of course I have to like keep saying like this is by no means representative. It does reflect my networks as well as charities to a certain degree. So, there's contributors from Montreal, contributors from Toronto, contributors from Vancouver. We almost had some contributors from Alberta, but it fell through. We were unfortunately not able to get contributors writing about the Maritimes or about the North, about the territories. But I did ask some journalists. So I am co-writing. So one of the things that we did was I approached Denise Benson, who is an amazing DJ and journalist and radio host and has been for like 30 years now, over 30 years, and has written a really amazing book that I actually am using to prop up my computer right now. So it's going to get lowered a second, but this is Then and Now. It's a book about Toronto clubs. So for me, this is a very key resource. So in knowing that Denise was super busy and that she doesn't need an academic publication on her CV, right? So I'm co-writing it with her. So I said, I will interview you. We'll get the transcript. I will write a chapter based on that transcript, and then you can review it and make any changes, additions that you want. We can workshop it together. And that's how we did that. Charity could also speak to this, but same thing we really wanted, to be able to talk about Cookham specifically. We were really wanted her to be in the book. So the solution was Lindsay Knight is an academic. But and you could correct me, Charity, your mic's off, but before she was an academic, she's been a hip hop artist for over 2 decades, right? And quite a prominent and successful hip hop artist, Indigenous hip hop artist here in Canada. So Charity knows Lindsay. So we recruited Lindsay to interview Cookham, and we did this by bringing Cookham and Lindsay to the International Association for the Study of Popular Music Canada conference in 2025 to get them in a room together to do the interview. So we did a lot of legwork to have non-academics or people that weren't just academics, not that there's any shame in it, in the book. I know that Aaron McLeod, who's here, Aaron is also an academic, but correct me if I'm wrong, Aaron, you've written a lot of journalistic and popular culture pieces as well. I was a music journalist before I was an academic. I wrote for CITR, which is the UBC radio station. CITR has a sister newspaper, which is still running, called Discorder. So I worked for Discorder and wrote for Discorder for almost a decade. So I don't know if that answers your question somewhat. And then we also put out a call. We put out a call through IASPM Networks in 2021, and that's how we had met Alexi, who's here, who's joined us today. Another contributor, Colette Coco Murray, whose chapter on soca DJs, the historical lineage of soca DJs in Toronto is amazing. I just shout out to Coco. I don't think she's joining us, but I love her chapter so much. So she responded to the call for papers. So some people we were lucky enough that they saw the call for paper and responded, but other people we really, I hunted Denise. I've known Denise for years. I've DJed with her for years, but I had to really beg her. So I don't know if that answers some of your question or not, or if Charity has anything to add.
Just quickly, one of the things that I would say is we know that this is not comprehensive. And I think, although we worked and looked at trying to have representation from different parts of the country, because regionalism is such an important place, we did Maren, when Maren approached me, one of the things she said was, I really appreciated the way that you did We Still Hear, Hip Hop North of the 49th Parallel, which I'll just pull up here, this, which is the first academic book on hip hop in Canada. But what ended up happening there was a similar kind of thing. Yes, there are academics, but there are also artists, hip hop artists. There are also folks that are in journalism. And it's, I think, even as a community engaged researcher, I think, and many of us, or as fans, like, I mean, I even come to the work as a fan. I think we often, when we're talking about popular music, I think there's, such an important value in place for understanding how different voices are able to get at like some of that that jouissance or that affect that happens with popular music in different forms or on the dance floor or like wherever it is. And yeah, I think so. Yes, it's strategic. I think when you put these collections, these edited collections together, you have to be strategic and you ask people for favors, right? Because that's important, and it's also part of how we do things and how we get to hear voices that we haven't heard. And I think that's a really knowing that was at the forefront for us too, is prioritizing voices about people or places or whatever it is, getting this information out there is an important part of how we brought the book together. Yeah.
And did the variety of voices you end up with, was it like what you wanted? Were there ever times when people were like giving you what they thought you wanted, and they're like, no, actually, we want your perspective? Or was it the other way around where it was like, okay, we need you to kind of consider the whole surrounding of what your piece is going to be part of?
Well, I think it was important for the stories, right? Like people are coming and bringing these stories to us, and I think there's something about that when you, as an author, are contributing something. There's something meaningful in what you're choosing to contribute, and you're being thoughtful and taking care. And I found that our authors have all have done that. And so there has been no, I think, major, oh my goodness, this is so far removed from what we were hoping for. This is like, oh, this is going to be such a great part of this story. Overall, it's going to make great contributions to this, and we're really excited to have it. So our work as editors in that way, it's been mostly like maybe shaping, the length of chapters and letting people know we won't, because we're bound to all of these things within books, like how many photos are we allowed, how many images can we actually carry and pay for, and what will the press allow us to do. I think it's been good in that way. I'm really excited that the press also, when talking about the Wilfred Laurier Press, they were really open to recognizing the value of having diverse kinds of voices in the edited collection, and thought that would bring a richness and a particular kind of value to it that they want to see. Because of course, then, the book's not just an academic book, but hopefully will have much more of a broader reach, right, in audience. But yeah.
There's a lot. I pulled this, I gave you an overview of the book, but in the original prospectus that we sent to Wilfred Laurier, I document sort of all the interest that there is in Canadian DJ culture that manifests online, or that manifests. There's lots of documentaries being done. There's one right now being done on Toronto House. People, because we were all reaching, like, especially a lot of us that were clubbing in the 90s and the 2000s, we're reaching a certain age, right? And so there's a lot of nostalgia. And so I think there's a lot of interest in Canada, in Canadian DJ culture. So that was, I think, another reason why Wilfred Laurier was willing to take the book on. Yeah. Thanks, Al.
Yeah. And I was also wondering, because, it's like DJ culture, a lot of the original facets of, kind of came to us from Jamaican sound system culture. Like there's a direct line, through Cool Herc, through hip hop. And I know, Canadian hip hop has, because there's such a Caribbean presence in like Toronto and parts of Canada. Like I know that's a big part of Canadian hip hop. Has that influenced Canadian dance music as well?
massively.
Mm.
But I mean, it's okay. That's a really interesting question. And Alexi's chapter does. I've been, Lexi and I've had conversations about this. His chapter about crate digging and discovering Canada through Rare Groove. I do feel that like hip hop has been pretty good at sampling Canadian music, but in terms of Canadian dance music, I don't know of a lot of Canadian dance music that samples or refers to earlier Canadian pop music. I think one prominent example would be Tiga covering Sunglasses at Night. And that was sort of one of the early electro clash hits. And in Charity's chapter on Peaches, which you might not get from the title, but one of the reasons that the Peaches chapter is in there is because electro clash was a genre, if you want to consider electro clash a genre, that had a heavy Canadian influence and was sort of hailed, right, or sort of introduced by, again, through this Tiga covering Sunglasses at Night, which was sort of ironic and sort of self-referential, but I think also just a straight up like fan appreciation. So this, this Canadian DJ who ran a record store and did a club night in Montreal for years before he was a producer, before he released music. His first single is this sort of Canadian referential track covering, Canada superstar Corey Hart. So another thing that we don't have a chapter in the book about hallucination and their powwow step, right? So what they call powwow step. Charity, if I'm getting this wrong, because I know this is more what you know about. And I think when you think about Canadian DJ culture, that's sort of like one of the original genres that Canada has contributed, that Indigenous people from Turtle Island have contributed to dance music, right? Is powwow step. And that's almost, I would argue, like a distinct genre that emerged from Turtle Island, that specifically, use a settler colonial name to distinguish it from America, from Canada, right? And so that's something that we are writing about in the introduction and in the shorter introductions to the chapter section. So there's a lot, like I said, kind of in my talk, that we have to fill in, or that we have to kind of try to fill in, because we didn't get a chapter about it. I don't know if that answered your question or not, if I was just yammering.
Oh, no, it was interesting.
Cookham, there's also, she talks about hallucination, right? She talks because she toured with them, and so there is conversation about them specifically, but not a whole chapter on that. So that's something, that we
I kind of want to ask Al about this though, because I was thinking about, did Moombahton come from Baltimore? Because I know that's Dave Nada, right?
Yeah, Dave Nada, I guess he's from DC, right?
Oh, he's from DC. Okay, so
I feel like he was really active in Baltimore. But yeah, I mean, it's interesting because so you bring up Electroclash, and I get into in the mid 2000s part of my book about how it's like by the time people recognized the Baltimore Club outside Baltimore, it kind of became part of the whole blog house thing, where there was just like there was this kind of micro scene interest in having Brazilian funk and Baltimore Club and Electroclash and Moombahton kind of came along in that era too, where it's like you get all these little regional styles that a DJ will do all of them in one night, as opposed to, because the thing with Baltimore Club music is for a while, it's like it even pushed hip hop out of DJ sets in Baltimore, where they'll just play club music for a few hours, nothing else, and then maybe some hip hop at the end of the night. And then in the 2000s, when it kind of became part of the bloodstream of dance music, more of kind of the international scene, it just became one of these many regional styles.
I know, I was thinking too, because I know that the hallucination came out of a club night in Ottawa that the DJs were doing when they were called a tribe called Red, and that they were basically doing a Moombahton night. And that's evolved into the powwow step. So I just was like, oh, maybe there's a sort of Baltimore, Ottawa connection there. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know if we should be handing this over to Alex to hear from. I can see that there's questions in the chat, or I was also just curious too. I mean, if I'm not hearing from Alex, so I think but the question that I had for you, and I don't mean to it's a bit of a change of topic, but you were talking about, again, sort of, I don't know if you would phrase it this way, but the decline of, or, K Swift's death in 2008, sort of marking a transition period where Baltimore Club became less prominent.
Mm-hmm.
Would you say that also had to do with like the internet and the different ways of consuming music, and how, since for the past 15 years, really more of the past 10, and really quite accelerated fashion in the past 5 years, DJ culture has kind of moved online, not entirely, but it's got this wide, presence online. A lot of DJs make content now, Twitch has emerged as a big platform. Did basically the digitization of DJ culture, do you think in any way contribute to Baltimore clubs displacement or such?
Yeah, I mean, there was absolutely a big change, and a lot of it started before K-Swift because, you know, a lot of the record stores, because it was a very strong ecosystem of labels making vinyl, having stores they could sell it in, two other Baltimore DJs, and local clubs. You know, it was one of these things where the ecosystem was actually pretty closed off, not on purpose, because again, they would try to take these records to New York, and in the 90s, New York was not interested. And so I think we were talking earlier about how, it's like there's a bit of an inferiority complex for cities like Baltimore, and probably Canada feels that sometimes comparing itself to American music, where it's like, you want to be part of these bigger scenes, but they're kind of, you get to create your own thing, but then you feel a little rejected by the bigger scenes. But for a long time, Baltimore was like, Philly had, some interest in it. Virginia, these artists could play shows outside Baltimore, but just or up and down the East Coast. Um, and so it was one of these things. It was a very local phenomenon, and even like the Baltimore media, like I kind of found as much as I could of local media covering it in the '90s, but there was just not a lot of print media, just because a it's like people didn't cover much dance music anyway, especially underground dance music, and especially black underground dance music. And it was kind of like lumped in with hip hop more than dance music for a long time. So yeah, it's like they had this ecosystem, and then once. Uh, Even local consumers kind of moved less from, because you didn't have to pay $10 for like an EP with two songs on it. You could get a mixed CD. So the consumers moved toward mixed CDs, and I talk about in the book how that really changed the scene, and it almost became more competitive because it was like, oh, I don't want anyone else to have this song on their mix CD. I want my hit to sell my mix CD. So it was one of these things where even that little change changed a lot. And K Swift was, one of the biggest mix CD people. Like one of the guys, Sean Caesar at Unruly, was telling me, it's like, they could put out, if Jay-Z had a new album out, K Swift's CD would outsell his CD in the local Baltimore stores. Like that's how big she was with these mix CDs. So yeah, it's one of those things where it's like, the scene moved toward the mix CDs, and then her, the biggest person, the biggest seller of mix CDs, died. So yeah, it was one of those things where, and there were other people that she would sell their CDs on her set, like DJ Chris J, and he just stopped making CDs after she died. And he died a few years later. So it's like there was a malaise for sure after she died, but there was also people who came in and did big records, like DJ Class had his biggest record a few months after she died. And KW Griff and Porkchop had a internationally big record, Bringing in the Cats, about 10 years ago. So there's been these moments, and in some ways, it's like everyone that's still in the scene is almost like more committed to carrying the torch, especially because like we've influenced Baltimore Club Music influenced Jersey Club, which is kind of more internationally known now. And as you talked about, it's like if you search for your subject and on Google and you don't see what you think should be acknowledged, you work to do that. And so for me, that was what the book was, and even for a long time in the early 2000s, because like I talked to one of the first guys who wrote like a really long, substantial essay about Baltimore Club Music, Scott Seward. And he was talking about, it's like, you could Google Baltimore Club or Baltimore Breaks in the early 2000s and be like his essay and a couple other things. There was nothing. So it became, fun to help fill in the narrative.
Great.
Okay. Hi. I think this is probably a good place to open it up to the Q&A, because we do have a few questions. One of them is, well, two of them are from the same person, it looks like, but and I think we might have time for that. Is it Niebuhr or Niebuhr? I don't want to get the last name wrong. But Lewis, if you want to go ahead and unmute and ask your first question, that'd be great.
Yeah. Well, I'm actually really curious in this Montreal, because I hadn't realized we were going to be talking about Montreal so much. And it's just really exciting because I write about disco and in Montreal, and the complicated way that queerness and disco work with so many, artists like Laurice and Denis Lepage, and how they fit into Unidisc, which is very straight, and Matra is very straight. It's all owned. All these record labels are straight owned, but so many of the artists are queer, and certainly the clubs were queer, that the music was played in largely. And I'm just wondering how what happens between 1979 or so and 1990, where it seems like most of the people here are starting. Yeah, sorry, I dead named Nini Noblesse. Yeah, so that was my question, really, because it seems interesting, and I just wonder why Canada seems to be so straight on the surface.
Well, I mean, it is on the surface. I can tell you that because I know that I came up through the queer scene in Canada as a DJ, specifically in Vancouver. And then when I moved to Toronto, I played predominantly queer scenes. But I don't know if Erin McLeod is here from Montreal and wrote one of the chapters of the book. And I don't know if you can talk, if you would be better positioned, Erin, to speak about this if you want to. I'm sorry, I'm putting you on the spot.
I mean, I'm not exactly an expert in disco of the 1970s. That's certainly for sure. I do think the one thing I would say with regards to Montreal in general is that language politics most often take precedence over everything else. And when I say language politics, I mean French English language politics. The very fact that we use the terms francophone, anglophone, and then allophone. Allophone basically meaning anybody whose first language isn't English or French, just all grouped into one bucket, demonstrates where the emphasis is placed. So everything else becomes secondary. You have language, and then you have race, you have ethnicity, you have sexuality, you have gender. All of that comes after language in a lot of ways. And I think that that is one of the reasons why you end up, I think that when you focus very specifically on language above everything else, you end up with a very kind of conservative, ethnocentric environment. And underneath it, there's all sorts of wonderful things going on. But from a sort of public facing perspective, I think right now of what we're living through in Quebec in terms of the kinds of laws that have stemmed from this focus on language, like Law 21 that restricts, public employment on the basis of head covering. So, I mean, it's that kind of thing that I think might contribute, if I had to say anything, might contribute to what Lewis is referencing.
Thank
I
you
don't know if
so
that
much.
helps.
No, that really does. That's really interesting. I want to let somebody else ask a question though, but I'm going to.
But Lewis, you're probably familiar with Will Straw's work because he would be a person that might have some knowledge in this area. Yeah. Back to Kim.
Okay. So Alex has a question, and then Lewis, you can ask your second question after that.
First off, great conversation. I'm really interested. I've been wanting to read Al's book for a while, and I'm looking forward to seeing how Maren and Charity's project shapes up. I was really struck by, given the sort of regional focus of these two projects, um, how or if you're able to sort of capture pocket histories of venues and clubs. I was also thinking quite a bit about Paxton Haven, a colleague of mine who is working on basically a project about Austin and how Austin's contemporary dance scene has been shaped by gentrification, venture capitalism, digital culture, etc. So I'm just kind of curious, like what happens to the clubs, what happens to the venue spaces, in these projects. If you could speak to that a bit more.
Yeah, well, we've
The
got
first part, yeah.
Ian.
Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry. Oh, Al, go ahead. I took the last question, so you go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, I mean the fun thing with my book is because it's like Baltimore's, people call it Smalltimore here because it feels like a small town. And so it's like everything's connected. And it's one of these things where a lot of the places I talk about in the book, it's like there was a club that is now just part of the movie theater that was next to it. And one of the places got kind of turned into a kind of a tech startup center, but they have a whole wall kind of honoring this Club Odell's, which was kind of like the birth of DJ culture in Baltimore because, you know, there were people that were starting who went to some of the original, like loft spaces in New York and got inspired, and so they kind of brought that atmosphere down to Baltimore in like the mid '70s. So I talked to Wayne Davis, who was like one of the first working DJs in Baltimore, about, they didn't have the switcher between the turntables back then. They had to like kind of jerry rig all these ways to do things that are easy now with the technology DJs have. So it was fun to talk to them about and find out, it's like all these spaces, and you can go down the street now. It's like, you can go Charles Street, which is kind of like the main thoroughfare in Baltimore, and you can see where one club used to be, and then where another building where there were multiple clubs, and I talk at the end of the book about how like one of these spaces, it's kind of on the auction block, and someone wants to kind of turn into a kind of a living historical space for the club culture. And again, it's like I could point out where all these record stores were. I remember one time I was downtown and there was a wrecking ball taking down one of the old record stores and like taking the sign of like the inner city record sign off it. So it's like again, we've lost a lot of this history already and kind of watched it one by one, like, the Paradox only stopped being a club about 10 years ago, and that was kind of the longest running one for 25 years. So it's one of these things where, it's like a lot of what happened with Baltimore club music is because it lived in the clubs. It was on the radio too, and you could buy the CDs in stores and the records in stores, but the whole ecosystem was people making a record they wanted to play in the club, hearing how the crowd responded to it, and then putting it out if people liked it or continuing to work on it based on what it sounded like in the club, because they would actually mix things based on how it sounded in the Paradox as opposed to what a mastering engineer in a label somewhere told them it should sound like. They would actually disagree when a bigger label would try to master it. It wouldn't sound the right way they wanted it to sound. They would use way more bass than someone else might consider good to do in a professional record. So it's one of these things where yeah, it was great to just talk to the people who were in these spaces at the time and just hear about, they'd turn a row house into a club. They'd turn a cement like industrial space into a club. And then at some point these buildings would revert back to what they were, but you can still drive by them and kind of know what they used to be. I don't know if you want to continue with your answer. Sorry.
No, I mean, well, yeah, in terms of the pocket histories, gentrification has definitely had an impact on the DJing club scenes in Toronto and Vancouver. Like that, I could document that, or I could point out who has documented that and what. I have done a pocket club history, and that discussed the impact of a queer women's bar. It started like we called ourselves at the beginning. We called it in 2003. We called ourselves a lesbian bar, but this is the Lit Club. This study was published in Dance Cult in 2017, so it's really really easy to find. And I talk about how that club that ran for 8 years really produced a lot of Flinta DJs. So a lot of, I myself included, DJ Rhiannon's another one, Jane Blaze is another one, Skylar Love. These are all people still working. Case Riot. These are all still working. We're all still working DJs today. Ian is here. Ian, who we brought on as a third co-editor actually recently. He wrote a chapter on a very influential club in Vancouver called Graceland. And Graceland, some of the DJs also published a newspaper called Disco Text. And I don't know, I would consider Ian's chapter to be a pocket history of Graceland.
Totally.
Yeah, there's Ian. So you can maybe you can expand.
Yeah, totally. I mean, that's sort of, it started out, I was just kind of going where I was going to go with the archival analysis, predominantly based on, the disco text, like zine that the club put out for its few years of existence. But you go where the research takes you, and like a lot of the chapter really does start talking about the change in the scene and how that is sort of like caught up both in gentrification, right? Like just the irony now that Graceland Club is like a sky-high condo that is called Grace Residence, right? And has a plaque commemorating the old disco club, the old house music club that used to be there. But also how it's really connected with what we've also been discussing a bit, and that's the digitization of the music and the scene, even and digitization, or sometimes people call it, when they can say the word, platformization, right? Like how just all of the distribution, but even the sounds. Let's go bass heavy, because that comes across digitally, of music, and how they're I wind up talking in the chapter a bit about how they're sort of connected, right? Because it costs so much now, even to never mind running a club, to go to a club, to go clubbing, right? And so it's just sort of that, combined with the fact that the scene has become so digitalized, kind of keeps kids away from clubs, and music venues in general, in Vancouver, but I mean in lots of cities. I mean, it sounds like, I was listening to what happened in Baltimore, and I was totally thinking about the chapter that I've written.
Thanks.
Okay, so our last question will be Lewis's second question.
I'm sorry, I think we kind of covered it a little bit when we talked about Smaltimore, but I'm just wondering about your positionality. Like, how did you integrate yourself into the scene? Were you already a part of the scene? This is for Al. Um, did you have to make your contacts as a journalist, as an academic? How does that work? And how do you position? How do you feel now as an insider, perhaps?
I mean, the nice thing was that, you know, starting to be a journalist, and I started working, writing for the Baltimore City paper in 2005. So at that point, it was like one of these things where it was like there was social media was starting to get. So like there were guys where I first reached out to them through MySpace, or like even like Black Star. I reached out to him through like Black Planet, which is like, Black social network. But I was like, it was the only place I could find his email address. Um, and these guys who were just starting to become more accessible, were 5 years earlier, I might have had to, uh, call the number that's on the record label, kind of thing. But and it's one of these things where I remember, because I never really talked to Kay Swift when she was alive, but I remember when I called the number on the Mixie or more Mixie, she was the only one who answered. So it's like these people were very accessible, even the most successful people in the scene. And the nice thing is that, because being local media, it's like people were pretty open with you. But at that point, people were already starting to talk to national press and starting to get calls from big magazines. And I think a lot of these guys, because they kind of labored without any media attention for many years, they had a healthy skepticism. But most of them have been pretty great to me. And it's one of those things where it's it's nice to just now. It's like, because it's weird that I've like known some of these people for 15 going on 20 years. So it's like I can just go out and run into people. And it's like, again, it's like it feels like a small town here. And occasionally there's been situations where it's like, people will be squabbling. It's like, do you want to write about personal? And there's like conflicts that didn't get into the book at all, because I think didn't feel like they were very substantial. And you don't want people to be remembered for their feuds. You want them to be remembered for their collaborations. So it was one of these things where it was great to kind of be a part of the community, but still kind of on the fringes. And sometimes people do cool stuff that I have to find out later. I was like, these people were more concerned with media. I would have heard about this stuff right away. So it's good and bad that people are kind of indifferent to media around here. It's great when they get attention, but it's not the end all and be all. They're more about serving the audience that they've been DJing to for 20, 30 years sometimes.
Okay. Well, great. Well, thank you all very much. Thanks to Maren, Charity, and Al. Please join us on April 15th, when Dana Pollan and Charles L. Granata discuss their work in progress, Hoboken to Hollywood, The American Places of Frank Sinatra. We hope to see you then. Thank you all.
Thank you. Thanks for having us. I just want to mention too, Luis, if you should